The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hi everyone, welcome to our training this morning. Looks like I have 7 on the call so far. I had 10 registered for today, so I'm just going to give those last 3 a couple more extra minutes to join. Training will be recorded as always. In a second, I'll once everyone gets in, we'll jump over to the ACE system like we did in previous trainings. Today we're going to be covering the how to manage the lessons that you're activating. So after the activation process that we covered last Thursday, we're going to be talking about how to manage your lessons after they're kind of set up. Some things you can set up to track your students' progress on the skills that you're working on. And then the second training that we have scheduled for this week, we'll be looking at data entry. So we'll be looking at paper pencil data entry and Teach Now data entry. So that's kind of our plan for the rest of the week. The last session that I have scheduled with everybody is a Q&A. It's scheduled for this time next Tuesday. So I'll hopefully get a sense over the training today and Thursday, whether or not we need to have that additional training for everybody, that additional session. And if not, I can be of support to folks as questions pop up as you start using the system going forward. Looks like we have our 10. So good morning, everyone who just joined us. I'm going to go ahead and get started. And as in previous trainings, if anyone has a question, by all means, please pop it into the questions filter, or I'd be happy to turn your mic on if you just want to raise your hand on the GoToWebinar platform. Okay. So I'm just going to go ahead and change my screen share. So I've already logged in to the system. So as previous trainings, we're using the training server version of the website. So that's training.aceapp.org if you're following along at home or in your office. And then from our app library, we're not actually going to click on curriculum. I'm going to show you a different way of navigating today, which I don't think we've touched on just yet. So on the app library, as with all the pages on the system, between your user profile icon and the logout button, you'll see a little icon with 3 lines and 3 dots at the side. Okay. If you click on that button, I'm just going to zoom out again so you can see what happens. When you click on that button, a window is going to appear on your screen, and it's going to list all the applications in the app library that you have access to. Now, on my screen, you're going to see the additional apps that I have access to that you don't have access to on your account. I'm speaking to the assessment tools and challenge and behavior. But what you should see on your end is curriculum at the top. And if you click on curriculum, which has a 5 beside it, in the drop down, you'll see 5 items you can quickly jump to within the curriculum application. So curriculum dashboard takes us to the page that we go to when we click on curriculum from the app library. Search lessons takes us through to searching for lessons via keyword, which we covered last Thursday. Browse lessons takes us to searching via scope and sequence. And then what we want to get to right now is to search our learners' lessons, okay, to get to our students' active lessons. So we're going to go ahead and click Search Learner Lessons. When we click on Search Learner Lessons, we're going to come to a page that looks like this, okay? Now, the lessons that are displayed here will be the lessons that are active for the student that I'm currently looking at. So I think I'm on a practice student, Charles. I'm going to switch over to my training student, Cormac Jr. Now, usually when that happens, when we're in the Search Learner profile, or the Search Learner Lessons, this will take us back to the curriculum dashboard. That's okay. We know that we can get to the students' active lessons by clicking on the big tick here beside the number of active lessons that are depicted on the screen. Okay, so that's just a couple of ways that we can get to our students' active lessons. We can go to the curriculum dashboard and click on that big tick like I just did, or the first time I got to this page with a different student, I can click on the general navigation menu, click curriculum, and then click Search Learner Lessons. Now on the Search Learner Lessons page, you'll have a list of the students' current active lessons. Okay, you'll see the objective numbers, a column for the objective numbers that you assigned these lessons when you activated them, the name of the lessons. That might be the same name as the default version of the lesson in the lesson bank, or it might be the unique name that you gave this lesson. Okay, and we talked about that when we were activating lessons last Thursday. Another column for the type of lesson this is, okay, SA, discrete trial, IT, incidental teaching, TA, task analysis, and then what area these lessons fall under the ES scope and sequence. You'll have a column for the activation date, a column for the lesson status, I'll talk about that in a few minutes, and then a column for the service plan year you assigned to each of these lessons, okay? In some cases, you might have multiple years here. Okay, maybe you have some lessons that are active from a previous IEP year, and you just keep them in there to run maintenance. Maybe it's not part of the student's current IEP or service plan, and then you have the student's current IEP year service plan related lessons listed here. Over on the left-hand side, you'll see filters. Okay, so some of the filters that are similar to the filters that we saw when we were in the lesson bank and searching via keyword. The main filter that I want to point out over here on the left-hand side is a toggle between active lessons, which I'm currently looking at, and archives lessons. So if I click on the archive option, I've now toggled over to the lessons that I've put in archive for Cormac Junior. You can see there's 2 lessons here. Archive lessons, you still have access to the data that were entered when they were active lessons. You can also reactivate these lessons if you need to. Okay, so if this is a lesson indicating the body parts and I want to reactivate it, I'm going to select it like I just did by clicking on the box. I'm going to click my action button and I'm going to click reactivate. Okay, I'm going to toggle back over to my active lessons. So here are my active lessons. And I'm going to just resort these by activation date to find the lesson that we activated on Thursday. And there it is there. We activated indicating name pictures. Okay, I assigned it as objective number 1.1. Okay, so I've selected the lesson by clicking on the box again. I'm going to click on my action button, and there's a number of things that I can do from our Search Learner Lessons page. First thing I can do, I can get back into the editing page. Okay, we talked about the editing page when we were activating this lesson on Thursday. So if I need to go back in, maybe make some refinements to how this lesson I'm set up, maybe I'm going to change things a couple of months from now. Okay, because I need to add more targets to this lesson. The student's doing really well and has mastered all the targets that I had set for this lesson. I want to add more targets. Maybe I want to change some settings for the lesson because the student is not making progress. Okay, I need to put in some remediation strategies. Okay, because the student is not getting to independent correct responding, for example. Okay, so you can always get back into the editing page. Change data status will change the visibility of this lesson in Teach Now. Okay, so I can change this over to making the lesson not visible in Teach Now. Okay, that means that when my direct care staff are in the Teach Now platform, okay, paperless data entry, this lesson is not going to be a lesson that they can select. Okay, and there might be reasons why I might want to put certain lessons not visible. I'm in Teach Now. Maybe for this lesson, I want to collect data on a paper pencil data sheet. Maybe I don't want them working on it just yet because the student needs to master a few other skills that I have active for him, but that are prerequisites for this particular lesson. Okay. Maybe this is a lesson that is going to be used by the speech and language pathologist, and we want to make sure that it's not visible. I'm in Teach Now, so someone doesn't accidentally go in and start working on it. Okay. Outside of the speech and language sessions. Okay, just giving you some scenarios why you might not want to have a lesson visible in Teach Now. Maybe the lesson's completely mastered and you want to stop your staff from just running this lesson instead of the other lessons that are currently in acquisition. Okay, that can happen sometimes. Everyone likes to run maintenance sessions because they're really easy. Okay, so you might consider doing that to manage your staff's behavior. The other options you have here for changing data status, is to put a lesson on hold or take it off hold. By putting the lesson on hold, you kind of like turn the lesson off altogether. So it's not going to be visible in Teach Now. You also won't be able to enter any paper pencil data for that particular lesson as well. Okay, and that's what you're seeing here in the status column. Okay, you can see I have 2 lessons currently, name objects and environment, and indicate name objects that are not visible lessons in Teach Now. Okay, if I were to select one of these lessons like name objects and environment, click the data, click the change data status option, and make it visible, I'm going to teach now, and click submit. You can see the status for that lesson updated. It's now blank. Okay, I'm indicating the lesson is not on hold. It is and is visible in Teach Now. The third option I'm going to drop down is to start a new plan year. Okay, so there might be some of these skills, some of these lessons that are going to be carryovers to the next IEP year, the next service plan year, the next academic year. Okay, so if that happened, I could just click start a new plan year. You'll see the box that we saw when we activated lessons on Thursday. Okay, it looks very similar. Where I can simply update the service plan year, maybe change the name of this lesson, maybe the name changed on the new IEP, okay, and the corresponding objective number changed on the IEP. Okay, so I can update those items right here. Fourth option down here is a means for me to apply the learner profile. So in our first training a couple of weeks ago, we talked about starting the learner profile. I'm applying the learner or setting up a learner profile in the student app. Okay. Learner profile was those selections of those typical teaching strategies that we want to use with a particular learner. So you might set it up ahead of time and then apply it to lessons when you activate them. That's what I did with Cormac Jr. on Thursday for this particular lesson. You might set up your learner profile, after the fact. Maybe you activate all the lessons that you want, and then you set up the learner profile, and then you apply it to all your lessons. This is how you would do that. Maybe you update your learner profile, 3 months from now, okay? Because you learned something new about your student regarding maybe the best way to feed prompts. This is how you would apply that updated learner profile to your lesson plans. Okay, I mentioned when we were covering the learner profile in the student app, when you update it, it's not going to automatically apply itself to your lesson plans that are active because there might be some lesson plans you don't want it to be applied to. This is how you tell the ACE which lesson plans you want to apply that learner profile to. Fifth option down here is to copy this lesson to another learner. This can be a really nice time saver if you're working on a lot of common skills across the students in your classroom or in your caseload. Okay, so maybe everybody in my kindergarten classroom are working on picture-to-picture matching, or following one-step directions, or working on a hand washing TA. Okay, the nice thing about copying to another learner, I could set up all those lessons on one student and then copy those lessons to another student, multiple students. Okay, so if I click on copy to another learner, I'll see again a window that looks very similar to the one that we saw when we were activating a lesson. I have the addition of this this top bar where I'm going to select a different student, like Kim here, another student in my trainer classroom. I can copy this lesson over to Kim's student profile. And the nice thing about this is even though I've already refined this lesson for Cormac Jr., I can apply Kim's learner profile to this lesson, Kim's service plan year, maybe change the name of this lesson to correspond with how I wrote this skill on Kim's IEP. Okay. And the copy learner or the copy lesson to another learner, like I said, it's a really nice time saver. It's also really useful when you're making lots of edits to the lessons that we have in our lesson bank. And the example I usually give to describe this is working on a hand washing TA. Okay, you find our hand washing TA, you really like it, but you have to change the last 3 steps because our hand washing TA lists off the last 3 steps of the student getting a paper towel to dry their hands. Okay, and in your bathroom at your school, you don't have a paper towel dispenser. You have a hand dryer. Okay, maybe it's an automatic hand dryer. Okay, so you've changed the steps on RTA when you set up the lesson for Cormac Jr. To reflect how drying hands works in your bathroom, at your school, in your classroom. Okay, but Cormac Jr. is not the only person working on hand washing. Kim's working on hand washing too. Okay, so instead of having to find that hand washing TA for Kim's student profile and then make those same changes, I could set the lesson plan up with Cormac Jr., make those changes, and then copy it over to Kim. What I'm copying is the Cormac created lesson plan. Okay, the one that I edited for Cormac Jr. Okay, I'm going to apply Kim's learner profile settings, but all the changes I made to the instructional plan, okay, the steps in the TA, maybe the targets in an essay lesson or the contexts in an IT lesson, I'm going to copy, or the additional instructions that I included in the lesson plan. Those are going to be copied over to the other learner, okay, when I'm copying a lesson. Okay. Any questions on copying lessons to another learner? Okay, just gonna hit the cancel button here. Um, Next option down here is a means to archive a lesson. Okay, so archive lessons are lessons that we're no longer teaching. Okay, maybe they were part of a previous IEP, student mastered all components of that lesson. We're going to put it in archive. Okay, we don't need to take data on it anymore. The student has the skill. Maybe that skill is incorporated into another skill that we're going to start working on. Okay, maybe a lesson we've activated it was not appropriate for the student at this moment in time. We tried to work on it. Student wasn't really making progress in that lesson. We're going to put it on an archive. And then at some point, we might want to reactivate it. Okay, and start working on that lesson plan again when the student is maybe more ready to work on that skill. Maybe they have acquired some prerequisite skills. They're just in a better place for us to work on that particular skill. Below archive, we have a delete option. I'm going to go ahead and click the delete button. I'll be asked whether I'm sure I might want to delete this lesson. I'm going to hit yes. And this lesson will be successfully deleted. Okay, it's now disappeared from my queue. The list of lessons has went down a number. Okay, I was able to do that with that particular lesson because I just activated it last Thursday. Okay, and I haven't touched that lesson since our last training. Okay, now I'm going to select a different lesson. It just so happens it has the same objective number, but it's a different lesson. It's match identical objects for Cormac Jr. When I click the action button and click delete for this lesson and click yes, I'm going to get this error message on the screen. Okay, I cannot delete a lesson with data. Okay, this lesson is a lesson that I've set up previously. There's data I'm already entered on it. I cannot delete this lesson. Okay, I can put it in archive. I can't delete it. Okay, so you can only delete lessons that have no data saved on them yet. Below that, we have a print list option. Okay, click that. Tab opens up, gives you a list of all the lessons and a nice big print button. Okay, so if you need to have this as a document, a hard copy document that you need to send to someone, maybe bring to mom and dad, maybe you want to show them, hey, this is our teaching plan. Okay, instead of having to type all those lesson plans out, you have it all listed here in a nice document that you can print. Print selection is similar to what we saw on Thursday. The difference is the print selection, the print view of the lesson plan is the student-specific version of this lesson plan. So this is Cormac Jr.'s version of lesson 84, match identical objects, and how it was set up for him. Okay, with his service plan year and the objective number I assigned to this lesson. Now, what folks tend to do, and this is what we do at NECC, folks tend to print the full lesson plan off and have it in a little program book, a little program binder in the classroom to refer to, so they can check on, things like how do we run baseline, what's our schedule for maintenance, what are all the targets that we're working on. Okay. Again, you have the big print button at the top right-hand corner of the screen. Last option here using our action button on the Search Learner Lessons page is a Generate Data Sheet button. If you click on that, you'll be asked to select a sublevel. I'm going to select 1.01, hit Submit. New tab opens up. Now we have a lesson-specific data sheet. Okay, a data sheet for match identical objects. Again, Cormac Jr.'s name is in the top right-hand corner. And the information that we're seeing here on the screen comes directly from the lesson plan that I just pulled up. I'm in our print selection screen. Okay, the information that you'll see is for teaching this lesson only. Okay, so I don't see the information for baseline. I don't see the information for maintenance. I just see the information pertaining to how to teach this skill. So you'll see the teacher behavior, learner or student behavior, the prompt type and fading procedure, what to do if the student responds correctly or incorrectly, criteria for prompt fading, criteria for contacting a supervisor, and the mastery criteria. Okay. This is a data sheet for sublevel 1.01. In the middle of the data sheet, in that green row, you'll see the targets listed. And then below that, we have 3 data blocks, okay, to collect our data. This is a paper pencil data sheet. So we have areas to write in the date we ran the session, our initials, where we were conducting this session, the prompts that we were using, what type of session we were implementing, and then rows to collect our data, trial by trial. Okay. The bottom of the screen, you can add more rows of data. You can save the data sheet. Okay. You can print the data sheet off. Okay. Saving the data sheet might be useful in the event you want to add more text to the data sheet. Okay, you can edit the data sheet right on the screen. Now, adding additional information, maybe changing some of the text here, I would only really recommend that if you are, maybe need to add more information for some of your direct care staff to help explain how to run this lesson. Okay, if you're making wholesale changes to the lesson and how you're teaching it, I'd recommend doing that in the lesson editing page versus here on the data sheets, so that those edits carry over, okay, into the full lesson plan and are noted on your lesson log. Okay, but if I hit the save button, I'll be able to find the save data sheet in another area of the system. Okay. So that's everything I can do to manage the lesson on the Search Learner Lessons page. Does anyone have any questions? And again, feel free to type your questions in. If anyone has a question and wants to put their hand up, I can turn your mic on. John has a question.
Okay, cool. I got myself unmuted. All right. Just a quick question. So, as a point of review, to put this in the context of the previous training. So, a teacher has done their assessment and identified the student needs.
Mm-hmm.
They've also completed the questionnaire or the profile for the student.
Mm-hmm.
And now we've just gone through how to find things, or we're working on learning more about how to find things, and we've selected a goal. And these lesson plans, when they click on this is what we're getting right now, is that it's going to generate a lesson plan that is specific to the student, correct?
Yes. Yep.
Okay, cool. Just put it all in context.
Yep. So the process was exactly how John described it. You could set up your learner profile on the student app, take your assessment results from the assessments that we discussed on Thursday. So y'all are using, the AFLS, the AFLS, maybe some of you are using the VB-MAP, maybe you guys are using some other assessments that we didn't talk about on Thursday. And you are then using that information to find specific goals, specific skills, specific lessons from our lesson bank using one of the 3 tools that we discussed on Thursday. So searching via our scopes and sequences, searching via keyword, maybe reaching out to the help desk to help find a lesson to fit a specific skill need for your students. And then you're going through the activation process that we discussed on Thursday, potentially going into the editing page and making the lesson specific regarding like the targets you want to teach, the teaching procedures you want to use, the prompt fitting procedures, additional instructions you want to add, etc., etc. This page here is where you're finding those lesson plans that you've activated. Okay, so the lesson activation process, you might spend, a couple of hours, depending on how many lessons you're looking for your student. This page here is where you're going to go to find those lesson plans from day to day, right? So I'm going to go in, a month from now, and I want to check on one of these lessons. I want to go in and make a change to one of these lessons. I want to go in and do some, housekeeping and print off more data sheets because I'm not using Teach Now and paperless data entry with Cormac Jr. for whatever reason. Okay, that's how I'm going to find these active lessons. So the next thing that we're going to do is we're going to go into the lesson a little bit deeper. Okay, again, this would be your day-to-day workflow. Okay, for certain lessons you want to look at, you want to pay a little bit more attention to, you want to see what's going on, look at the previous results, etc., etc. We're going to go to the active lesson landing page. So to do that, again, we're on our Search Learner Lessons page. This time, I'm going to click on the objective number. So I'm going to go into my match identical objects lesson. Feel free to go into the lesson that we activated on Thursday. Okay, to get into it, like I said, we're going to click on the objective number. The objective number is in that blue text that we discussed in previous trainings. It usually indicates a hyperlink. When you click on it, something's going to happen. Okay, in this case, when we click on the objective number, the page is going to reload and it's going to bring us to the active lesson landing page, which is going to look like this. So what we're seeing on the screen is everything I kind of need to evaluate how this lesson plan is going. Okay, on your screen, on your lesson that you activated last week, you're not going to see all the information that I see on my screen because you haven't entered any data yet for your lesson, whereas I've entered data for my lesson. Okay. Now on the screen, you'll see it it's kind of set up in that other, I'm in that dashboard kind of format. So I'm sure you're gonna have all your boxes, all your widgets. Okay. So we have an enter data widget at the top. Okay. A quick way to jump into summary data entry. Okay. That's your paper pencil data. Or to jump to teach now for this lesson. Okay. We're going to be covering both these data entry components in our training on Thursday. You have another widget to navigate to other lessons that you have active for the students. So you don't have to go back to the Search Learner Lessons page, either by clicking on your breadcrumbs up here, or going to the app library and clicking on Curriculum Dashboard, or clicking on your general navigation menu. Okay, you can use the next lesson widget to navigate to the other active lessons that you have for the student. Okay, you can click the drop down, okay, and select one of those lessons that you have active for the students. There's those lessons listed that we saw on the previous page on the Search Learner Lessons page. Or you could click Go to Next Lesson. That's going to cycle you through the lessons via objective number. Okay, that's why I recommend, I'm assigning your lessons a specific objective number versus 0.0. It could be a nice way to just organize your lessons that you have active. Progress towards objective and session tally, I'm going to speak to in a minute. Okay, I want to talk about the other things that are on this page, but these are two important components to help you evaluate how the lesson plan is going. I'll talk about those in a second. Further down the screen, lesson results will give you the most recent lesson results for this lesson. Okay, this is an essay or skill acquisition lesson. The graph for this lesson is a line graph. Okay, and there's two data paths on the graph. The dark blue diamonds are the percentage of trials in which the student responded correctly and independently in a session. And the light blue circles are the percentage of trials in a teaching session in which the student responded correctly. So either prompted responses or independent responses. Okay. And each set of data points is one session. So there is the student's performance on a session that was implemented on February 25th. He was 100% correct, 0 correct independent. We prompted every correct response. Okay. Above the graph, you can toggle between the different levels. Okay, so I mentioned when we were looking at essay lessons that they have, some of them can have multiple levels. This lesson plan only has one level. So I click on the drop down, I see one level. And then beside the level drop down, we see our sub-level drop down. Our sub-levels are our sets of targets. So right now, I'm looking at the student's performance on Candy Chips Cracker. Here's his performance on Brush Book Spoon. Here's his performance on Fork Ball Cup. Okay. If I click on the past data grid, I'll see these data, but listed in a table format. Okay, with each row being one teaching session. Okay. I'll have information on what trial type was implemented. You can see I ran baseline on these targets a long time ago. When we went into training, what prompt we were using in each of those training sessions, what was the student's performance, again, percentage of trials correct and correct independent. And then you can see who ran the session, the teacher initials, and where we ran this session. We ran these sessions in School 1. Okay. Below the lesson results, you're going to have an instructional summary report. Okay, this gives you the status of all the targets that you have listed for this lesson plan. Okay, so you can see the dates and when we introduced these targets for Cormac Jr. Okay, gives you information on whether or not any of the targets are currently mastered, and when that happened, how many trials it took to mastery. If targets are mastered and we have some maintenance data, when was the last maintenance session implemented? And then if any targets went back into reteaching, which is not depicted here, but if any of these targets went back into reteaching, we would have that information too. Okay. Again, this report gives us the status of each set of targets. Going clockwise, over on the left-hand side, you can see a lesson notes box. Okay, lesson notes come from Teach Now. These are electronic sticky notes that your teaching staff can leave for each other or leave for you. Okay, to kind of give you information on how some of the sessions are going. Okay, you can see that I left a note on September 3rd, indicating that the session that we ran on September 3rd of last year with sublevel 1.01, the student made most of his errors on the Cracker trials. Okay, maybe the information I want to pass on to the SPED teacher, the BCBA who's overseeing this lesson. Okay. There's also notes that the staff might leave each other to, kind of tell them what to do next. Okay, someone should run 1.06. I loan the stimuli to Sally's teacher in classroom 2C. Okay, little nuggets of information you want to pass on to the next person. Need new stimuli. Candy stimulus was destroyed. Above the lesson notes, you'll have your lesson log. Okay, your lesson log is where you are logging all the changes you made within this lesson. We talked about the event log in the student app. That's covering everything going on with the student. The lesson log is noting all the changes to this particular lesson. Okay, so you'll see some of the ACE generated events listed here. Okay, when I changed the ACE objective statement, when I introduced targets, we changed the progress towards objective goal. Okay, there are also events that I can log myself in here. Okay, maybe I want to note the day that we isolated the number of teachers working on this lesson. Okay, maybe we want to note that we're only going to work on this lesson in the morning when Cormac Jr. is a little bit more motivated. Okay, maybe we're going to say that we're going to we changed how we are presenting the stimuli on an angled 3-stem array board. Okay. Pieces of information that I want to log, noting the changes to how we're teaching this lesson, what's going on with this lesson. These events can then be selected to show up as phase lines on our session data graph. Okay, so not this graph here. This graph here is giving us a snapshot. Okay, giving us an indication of how the most recent sessions have went. There is a session data report that we can run in the reports app where we can select our own specific date range, how we want to look at our data, and which events we want to evaluate. Okay, in terms of as phase lines on our graph to kind of see, well, what happened after we changed the teaching strategy for this lesson? Did the students start making more progress, start engaging in more correct independent responding? Above that, we have managed lesson. You go into managed lesson. You'll see a page that looks familiar to the one that we saw when we were viewing lessons on Thursday. Okay, so we're going to have the full lesson plan. We have an action button to jump back into the editing page and do some of the things that we could do on the search learner lessons page with that action button. We also have the lesson materials that are linked to this lesson and stimuli if applicable. And then above, we have our saved data sheet. So there's the data sheet that I saved a few minutes ago, 1.01. If I click on it and click go, new tab opens up on my browser. There's that edited lesson plan that I created 5 or 10 minutes ago with the additional data blocks I added. So that's how you'll find your saved data sheets. To get back to the active lesson landing page, I can use my breadcrumbs here. I'm on the top. Or I could click the action button and click close, or I could click the close button at the bottom of the screen. Okay, 3 different ways to get back to the previous page. Any questions thus far on the active lesson landing page? Okay, last 2 items on this page is your PTO and your session tally. And I spoke about these briefly when we were looking at the performance overview on the curriculum dashboard. Okay, so I'm just going to quickly navigate over there just to refresh everybody. I'm going to use my general navigation menu, click on curriculum, and click curriculum dashboard. So we talked about the PTO and the session tally in the context of our performance overview widget here on our dashboard. Click run report. That's one of the 3 reports that I can quickly look at to see how the student's doing. So there's our PTO, and there's the session tally. Okay. I'm going to use my breadcrumbs to go back to the Match Identical Objects active lesson page. There we go. So this is where I'm going to go to set those 2 items up for each lesson. Okay, I'm doing it on the active lesson landing page for each lesson. The PTO is a dial. Okay, it's indicating the % of the annual goal that's currently met. And you can see right now it's saying 56% of annual goal met, 0 out of 3 targets mastered. Okay, now I'm going to tell you right now that this dial is incorrect. Okay, it's not giving me a true reflection of how much progress Cormac Jr. is making towards this annual goal, and I'll tell you why. Cormac Jr. is working on this target, or I'm working on this lesson across 15 targets. Okay, so we don't have the right number of targets being evaluated right now. It's evaluating his progress on 3 targets instead of 15. If I scroll down, and those of you who were eagle-eyed looking at our instructional summary report, you'll see that there are a number of targets that are already mastered. Yet the PTO at the top is saying 0. Our PTO has been set up incorrectly. Okay, so I'm going to go in and fix it. And by doing so, you'll see how we're supposed to set it up. So I'm going to click Manage Worksheet. When I click on Manage Worksheet, we'll come to a page that looks like this. On this page, you will have the ACE lesson objective listed, the mastery criteria, and from that objective statement, the number of learning targets that you're trying to teach this skill across. So I'm trying to teach this skill across 15 objects. Below the number of learning targets, you'll see that there is a I am teaching option, and right now there is a number 3 depicted here. And there's a little red exclamation point that I might want to pay attention to. When you hover over the red exclamation point, it's going to tell you what it means. The values of the PTO and the objective statement do not match. While this is not always possible, it's best to have them share a value. Okay, so that's why the percentage that I saw on the dial previously is incorrect. I am not evaluating the student's progress on the total number of targets for this lesson. I'm only looking at 3 targets instead of 15. So I want to select more targets down here. Okay, so I've actually set up 18 targets for this lesson. I'm going to select the first 5 sets of targets. Okay, each sub-level has 3 targets, so we have multiples of 3. Now, because I've selected 5 sets of targets, my number of learning targets and the number that I'm teaching now match. Okay, so when I click the Save button and go back to the previous page, my active lesson landing page, I'm going to have a different percentage here, a better reflection on how much progress my student's making towards this particular objective. So it's now saying 60% of annual goal met, and that's because Cormac Jr. has mastered 9 out of 15 targets. Does anyone have any questions on that PTO as of right now? If I were to go back into the worksheet, and remember, for the objective statement, I'm only trying to teach 15 targets, but I'm going to select that other set of targets that I've added to this lesson. Okay, so now I am teaching 18. The little red exclamation point has popped up again. These numbers do not match. When I click the Save button and I see my new PTO value, it's going to be different. It's dropped down to 50%. Okay, now I'm underestimating the amount of progress Cormac Jr. has made towards mastering this objective. Okay, because I'm evaluating the number of targets he's mastered out of a greater number of targets, more targets than I need to satisfy the objective statement that I've set for this lesson. If I were to go back in and change it again, maybe select a smaller number, this time 12, and hit save, the dial's going to change again. The dial didn't change completely. It said I'm at 50%, but I'm evaluating 12 targets this time. And of those 12 targets that I am evaluating, 6 of them have been mastered. When I deselected a 1.06 and 1.05, I deselected a set of targets that have been mastered. So that's why my number of master targets has decreased from 9 to 6. The third way the PTO gets evaluated, and you kind of saw this from how it looked when we first looked at it. I'm going to deselect all these targets, and I'm just going to select 1.01 like we had when we first went into this worksheet. Now, you might say, well, the dial's going to be at 0 because no targets have been mastered. The dial's not going to be at 0. It's actually at 56%. The reason why it's at 56%, even though no targets have been mastered, it's evaluating the student's progress towards mastering these 3 targets. So instead of looking at whether the targets have been mastered or not, it's looking at the student's performance on these targets. So 1.01, we have some data entered. If I look at my past data grid, you can see in one of the last sessions we implemented, the student was correct and independent 100% of the time, okay? It's looking at the last 3 sessions and averaging those last 3 sessions in terms of the student's correct and independent performance. Why the last 3 sessions? Well, for this lesson, the number of sessions, sorry, it's 2 consecutive sessions, last 2 sessions, I misspoke. I'm looking at the last 2 sessions for the mastery criteria. So it's averaged his performance across those 2 sessions. This is useful for us to be aware of when we're looking at a task analysis lesson. So if I go to a task analysis lesson, like my puzzle lesson, lesson 23, this TA lesson, I'm teaching Cormac Jr. to complete 1 puzzle, 1 behavior chain. That chain has not yet been mastered, okay? 0 out of 1 mastered. Yet, the dial is at 42% because it's evaluating his performance, his independent performance on the chain thus far. And you can see in the previous, on the last few sessions, the student has been performing 5 out of the 12 steps independently. That's what's gaining me this 42% of annual gold net. So the PTO can give you different values depending on what you're selecting and how you set your lesson up, okay? And how many targets you're trying to evaluate. I recommend reading through the Help Center article on the PTO for more information and to better understand the math that goes into calculating this. There's also a pre-recorded training and resources in the Learning app called Setting New ACE Records for New IEPs. And it kind of goes through all these different scenarios with your PTO if you're looking for more information on this. Any questions on the PTO? And I know that it is kind of confusing. Again, feel free to type your questions in. If you want to raise your hand, I can turn your mic on. Okay. After our PTO comes the session tally. I'm going to go back over to my 1.1 my technical objects lesson. So the session tally for this lesson has already been set. You can see that the goal for this lesson, I want this lesson plan implemented at least 5 times a week. And my team have ran this lesson twice already this week. Okay, so that's good information for me to have. To set the session tally, I'm going to click my action button. I'm going to click edit, and then I'm going to specify the number of sessions I want across a specific time period. Maybe I want to use a daily goal, a weekly goal, or a monthly goal. And then hit the save button. If a lesson does not have a session tally goal set up for it, so I'm just trying to remember which one that is. I guess this one. Oh, no, not that one. Not that one either. Sorry, folks, bear with me. I'm just going to jump over to a different student. There we go. This lesson here for this student does not have a session tally goal set up yet. So you'll see that the information we have here is NA. Okay. So even though folks may have ran this lesson 5, 10, 15, 20 times already this week or this month with this student, I'm not going to see that that information summarized here. I'm in my session tally like I did with Cormac Junior's lessons. For Cormac Junior's lessons, I had session tally set up. Okay. Any questions on the session tally? What folks tend to do is either do like a weekly goal or a daily goal. Okay. Weekly goal, 5 times a week. I want the lesson plan run at least once a day. You might go ahead and set up the session tally goal once per day. So up to this point, we've covered getting to the students' active lessons, okay, by going to this page. All the things we can do to manage the lesson using the action button. And then we've talked through all the information that's available to us on the active lesson landing page. How to set up our PTO, our session tally, getting into managing the lesson, and where the lesson log is. This active lesson landing page is the page that we look at on a day-to-day basis at NECC. Okay, there's a lot of the information that we need to kind of see how a lesson plan is going and what changes we might consider making are on this page. Okay, we can see how much progress the student was making towards the lesson, how many times our staff are running the lesson, the most recent results, okay, how the student has been performed recently, the status of each set of targets, notes from our staff who have been working on this lesson, a historical log of changes we've made to the lesson, and a way to go in to manage the lesson and make some changes if we want to. This is the page that we look at in our monthly meetings when we're talking about the status of each objective we have for the student. Any questions on the items that we've discussed up to this point? Y'all are a very quiet bunch today. Okay, so we have 25 minutes left. There are 2 ways we could go for the rest of our training session today. We could start talking about data entry, and I could cover summary data entry pretty quickly. I think I want to leave Teach Now until Thursday, okay, so we can get a very good overview of paperless data entry. The other thing that we could do, we haven't looked at our TA lessons from the lesson bank or our IT lessons from the lesson bank, so I could go through those lesson plans so you can see what they look like, okay? Or I'd be happy to help folks find some lesson plans, some specific lesson plans for their learners. We can kind of like workshop it together if that would be helpful. So I'm happy to have anyone speak for the group. John, I'm happy to have you speak for the group.
I would be happy to have the group speak. What is I've asked plenty of questions. What does everybody think?
Again, if anyone would like to let us know through the questions on the chat, I can also turn a mic on if folks want to raise their hand.
Self-expression is usually not an issue for this team. So let's hear some thoughts.
Abigail said data entry. Sean said whatever's easiest. Abigail, speaking for the group, let's talk about summary data entry. Okay, thank you, Abigail. Okay, so this is going to cover paper pencil data entry. Okay, so we're already on the active lesson landing page for match identical objects. So we could click on enter summary data. Okay, that's what we call paper pencil data entry. The other way to get to paper pencil data entry, which I think is a little bit quicker, especially when you're logging into the system, is through the curriculum dashboard. Okay, so I could click on curriculum dashboard because it's on my breadcrumbs right here. I'm going to go ahead and do that. You can navigate to curriculum dashboard by clicking app library, then curriculum. Either way, you're going to come to this page. And summary data entry is at the bottom of the dashboard. On my screen, it's over on the left-hand side. Okay, you have a nice handy drop-down. Okay, for active lessons for your current selected student. I'm going to go ahead and go to my maths identical objects lesson and click data entry. And then we'll come to a data entry page that looks like this. Now, what I'd recommend when you get to the summary data entry page is double check you're on the right lesson. Okay, there's nothing worse than taking a big stack of paper pencil data sheets, summing them all, entering all those data, and then realizing you entered the data for match identical pictures under your match identical objects lesson. Okay, so just double check, make sure you're on the right lesson. Again, you have a next lesson widget to navigate to the other active lessons that you have for the student. Okay, but I'm going to enter some data for match identical objects. I'm going to scroll down. The data entry page is pretty self-explanatory. You're going to pop in the date that corresponds to the session that you're entering data for. So let's pretend I took some paper pencil data yesterday. The setting, you can decide what these different codes mean for you, for your students in your classroom at your school. Okay, these are lines of code in the system for the ACE to help recognize when mastery criteria has been met. Okay, so if you are setting up your lesson objectives, your mastery criteria for skills to be taught across multiple settings, you want to specify, you want to select different settings for your teaching sessions. Okay, so school one, for argument's sake, might be the students like home, typical home desk in their classroom, you know, their typical seating assignment, okay, their cubby area, okay, whereas school two might be, you know, another desk in their classroom, might be another area of the school, like the library or the hallway, or, you know, classroom two, you know, on the first floor, or the playground, or whatever, okay. So I'd recommend just deciding what you want these different settings to mean if you're teaching across multiple settings. Okay. Teacher initials, self-explanatory. We're going to pop in teacher initials of who ran the session. We're going to select the level from the drop-down. Again, this lesson only has one level, so we have one level from the drop-down. We want to make sure we're entering data for the right level, okay, if the lesson has multiple levels. Sub-level, okay, so the sets of targets that we're entering data for. And the little star that you're seeing here beside my sublevels indicate that I've already entered data for some of these sublevels already. Okay. If the sublevel doesn't have that little star, we haven't entered any data yet for that sublevel. The sublevel that you select, the corresponding targets will be listed in this column. Okay, so there's 1.01. If I click 1.05, the target's obviously changed. The trial type. Okay, did I run a training session, a baseline session, a maintenance session, or a probe session? At this point, I think it might be a good idea to talk about what probe sessions are, because I do get this question a lot. What is a probe session? A probe session is a session you might conduct during teaching, okay, when you want to check in on how the student is performing without all your fancy teaching strategies. What I mean by that is all your prompting and all your error corrections that you might be doing when you're doing a teaching session, okay? A probe session looks very similar to a baseline session, okay? We're not prompting, we're not doing an error correction, we are providing reinforcement for correct responding, okay? The reason why you might want to run a probe session, you suspect the student has the skill, okay, is performing at the mastery criteria or close to it. Okay, so maybe you run one teaching session, you're like, I think the student's got this already. I'm going to run a probe session. Okay, we're not calling it a baseline session again because we already ran baseline and then you started doing some teaching sessions. Okay, so that's one situation where you might run a probe session. Another situation, the student's been out of the program for a little while. Okay, maybe it's the first day back after Easter vacation, spring break, Christmas vacation. The student's been out sick for a couple of weeks. Okay, you might want to run a probe session to see how the student is performing after 2 weeks away from um, instruction. Okay, maybe before they left, they were at the independent prompt step. You want to double check and make sure that you should start there versus maybe an earlier prompt step. Okay, you might run a probe session to kind of see how they're performing at this point. Probe session might be something that the speech and language pathologist runs. Okay, maybe you have a lesson plan set up that's a speech goal. Okay, your direct care staff are working on that lesson throughout the week, but in the speech and language pathologist session on a Friday, they are going to be evaluating this skill under a different lens, okay? Because they obviously have a different skill set, a different level of training to evaluate how the student is performing on that vocal imitation lesson that your staff are working on during the week. So they might run probe sessions versus teaching sessions that the direct care staff are running during the week. Okay, those are situations where you might use that probe session. Okay, baseline is it's pretty self-explanatory. Your maintenance sessions are the sessions you're running after a set of targets have been mastered to make sure the student is maintaining the skill with those targets. When you select baseline, maintenance, or probe, the prescribed prompt will automatically default to NA because we're not prompting using those 3 trial types. Okay. Whereas training, we are going to be using a prompt. Okay. I'm going to select what that prompt is. Okay. So this lesson plan is set up with a time delay prompt fitting procedure. Okay. I'm going to enter some data with the immediate prompt. And then from here, I'm going to take my 9 trial data block and then just count up the number of responses that were correct with prompt, incorrect, and incorrect with prompt. I'm entering data for a session in which we use the immediate prompt, so I shouldn't expect to be entering any plus data or minus incorrect data, okay? Because those are independent responses, correct or I'm incorrect. The staff member who ran the session should only really be providing the prompt immediately, so they shouldn't really have an opportunity to respond independently. If I'm seeing pluses and minuses on my data block, I might want to flag that teaching session, talk to the staff, and see why they wrote those data when they were supposed to be using a immediate prompt. So let's assume that the student responded correctly with the prompt 8 times, responded incorrectly with a prompt 1 time. Okay, it's going to sum those trials. So we have 9 trials. And the student is at 0% correct independence, which is what we'd expect because we're prompting immediately. There's no room for independence just yet. And then from here, we can hit save or add row. Okay, they both do the same thing. They save the data. Clicking the save button advances you to the next day in the calendar. So it's going to move us from 322 to 323. Add row will save the data but keep us on the same date. Might be useful if you've collected multiple sessions or taken data across multiple sessions in a day. I'm going to hit save. Everything resets. Calendar went to 323. If I scroll down, we can see the past data grid or the past data graph below and the past data grid. There's the session that I just added data for just now. Now, in this view of the data, different from what we saw on the active lesson landing page, I have a couple of actions that are available to me on the right-hand side. The blue notepad with a pencil enables me to edit this result. The red trash can enables me to delete this result, okay, in a situation where I entered the data in the wrong place, okay? If you click the edit button, this message will appear, okay? The reason why this appears, even though I entered the data via summary data, if you enter data via Teach Now, you have access to the session's trial by trial data. We'll see what that looks like on Thursday, okay? So just bear that in mind if you are editing results for whatever reason. Any questions on summary data entry for an essay lesson? This was an essay lesson. John?
Yeah, this is actually for the whole team more so than for you, Cormac. But looking at these different types of data collection that we just saw in both these sections, specifically the baseline stuff, the probe data, all that kind of thing. I don't know that as a general rule, our teachers maximize that as a tool.
Mm-hmm.
And I think using ACE is going to give us an opportunity to for these 6 teachers that are here today to try this a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
And when we do train this on a larger scale for the rest of the teachers as we roll out bigger, I'd love to hear your perspective provided to your peers in terms of how that works. And then from the standpoint of the teacher leads, and if Dawn's logged on, I'm not sure if she's here yet or not. I didn't see the whole list. Training the teachers on how to do probe data is going to be something we're going to have to work together with this group and then with the next group. But I think it's a great tool that we don't use enough, and I think ACE might give us an opportunity to train for it.
Great. And I think one of the things you'll see on Thursday, like we're looking at paper pencil data entry right now. On Thursday, and we get into Teach Now, to John's point, using Teach Now with our lesson plans kind of moves you through that like process of taking baseline with your targets that you're introducing and then going into teaching and then having the ACE recognize for you when that mastery criteria has been met based on what you set up. And that's why I want to spend like a full hour doing that on Thursday versus trying to cram it into the last 10 minutes of today's session, just to kind of see that whole process work. I'm probably going to be butchering your name, but Yosaris, I think I'm pronouncing that correctly. You have your hand up, so I'm going to unmute you. Hi. Hello?
Can you hear me?
I can hear you. Hi.
Okay. It's Jacides. You can just call me Jessie though.
Oh.
So my question is, so these data entry drop downs are generated when you select a lesson?
These data entry drop downs?
Yes. So the date, the setting, the sub, the target, all of that is generated off of like this lesson that you choose?
Yes. Yep. So it's I'm entering data for a lesson that I have activated for my student. So if this lesson wasn't activated, I wouldn't be in this page. I might be in, another page. So let me give you an example, and then I'm going to show you data entry for like a different type of lesson. But if I were to go into, and this is not to pick on anybody, I'm just going to the first student, assuming that, this is a lot of work. You guys have just been using the system for a week, but I'm assuming maybe, I was right, Paul doesn't have any active lessons yet. If I were to scroll down, you can see that I can't get into data entry. Okay, there's no active lessons for Paul yet. So I have no active lessons listed here. If I try to click on data entry, like nothing's going to happen. Okay, so to your point, Jesse, I can't get into data entry for if there are no lessons active for the student. Which for Paul's case, that's true. There's no lessons active for him right now. For my training student, my friend Cormac Jr., he has a ton of active lessons, right? He has 26 of them. You can see them right there on the view lessons widget, okay? There's 26 lessons. So when I scroll down on my curriculum dashboard to enter data, all those lessons are listed. These are lessons that I have activated previously, okay? I'm going to go to a different lesson. Maybe just I'll stick to an essay lesson. So let's go to follow complex directions. Okay, this is another essay lesson, and I'm going to do the same thing. I don't think I've worked on it yet, So let's say I'm entering some baseline data for today. I'm going to select the level. Oh, this is a bad example because I've not set this lesson up properly. Let's do answer questions personal ID instead. That's better. Okay. Answer questions personal ID. Okay, so I'm going to do some data for, again, let's say yesterday. This lesson has 2 levels this time. Okay, I'm going to enter some data for level 1. Sublevel 1.01, you can see the targets are different from the targets that we saw for our previous lesson, okay? Which makes sense because we're teaching the student to answer questions. Personal ID, what is your name? Where do you live? What is your phone number? When is your birthday? Etc., etc. And you can see that the prompt was different. The prompt selections were different here. Data entry is kind of similar in terms of I'm taking my 9 trial or 10 trial or 5 trial data block, and I'm counting up the number of responses in which a student responded correctly with a prompt, incorrectly, or incorrectly with a prompt. Does that help answer questions regarding the data entry and how the data entry might be, how the data entry might be slightly different depending on what lesson I'm looking at? And for the 2 examples I just went through, my match identical objects lesson versus my answer questions personal ID lesson that I have up right now, the differences are the number of levels, potentially the number of sublevels, and what those targets, what targets are associated with those sublevels. And then lastly, what type of prompts we're using. Wonderful, thank you, Jesse. I'm going to go to a TA lesson this time, okay? So I'm going to go to my puzzle lesson, lesson 23. I'm going to scroll down. First line, it's pretty similar, okay? I'm selecting the date, the setting, teacher initials, okay? Now, instead of having levels and sublevels for TAs, we have chains. We're teaching chains of behavior. So this TA has 1 chain. You can add more chains to your TAs. This TA has 1 chain. We're using a forward chaining sequence. I'm going to enter some data for training. And all right, let's say we're entering data for, let's say we're entering data for teaching step 6 in the chain. So I'm select that from the teaching step. The data that I'm entering for a task analysis is the prompt that was prescribed for the teaching step. So for this teaching session, we were at the independent prompt step. I'm making this up. And our data for the teaching step, was the student correct? Independent, correct with prompt. That doesn't make sense for this prompt step because I was at the independent prompt step. Was he incorrect or was he incorrect with a prompt? So for this session, it's either going to be correct independent or incorrect independent. I'm going to say that he performed correctly. When I select my data, it's going to give me the number of independent steps total. Okay, the reason why it's saying 6 here is because I'm teaching a behavior chain using a forward chain. We're on step 6. That means that the student has mastered the 5 previous steps. That means that they should be independent. Because I'm entering independent correct data for step 6 for this session, that's why I'm getting 6 independent steps here. Now, if the student made an error on one of those previously mastered steps, I'm going to select it by, I'm making one of these selections here. So let's say he made an error on step 3 in the chain. You can see that the number of independent steps dropped down to 5. And then if I go ahead and hit the Save button, data successfully saved. If I scroll down, there's my data point right there. Okay, exactly the information that I entered just now. We were at teaching step 6, the independent prompt step. The student responded correctly on the teaching step. He did make an error on one of the previously mastered steps, and we have the information on what step that was, step 3. And the session graph for a task analysis lesson is a bar graph, okay? The bars indicate the number of steps that were independent across each teaching session, okay? There's the teaching session that I just entered data for. 5 steps independent. Questions on data entry for a task analysis lesson?
Just a comment about how cool that is that that data is available so quickly.
Yep, the graph is automatically up there. And then the other thing to note, the active lesson landing page that we looked at, that data is going to be there. You're going to see that data point as soon as it's saved, whether the data is saved via summary data, which is what we're on right now. This is the summary data entry page, or in Teach Now. And to John's point, that's really cool. When we talk about Teach Now on Thursday, your staff could be implementing a teaching session right now, and then after they've done and they've saved, you could log onto the ISH yourself as the supervisor and see that data point on the graph. Okay, see that information I'm on that teaching session in your past data grid. Okay. Lastly, in our last 4 minutes, I'm going to look at an incidental teaching lesson for everybody. So I'm going to scroll down to one of those. I think it's this one. Nope, it's not that one. I have 2 lessons exactly the same name. I always forget which one it is. It's not that one. It is, there it is. So this is an incidental teaching lesson, okay? Incidental teaching lessons, we're taking advantage of opportunities as they present themselves during the day, or opportunities that we're going to set up. So I'm teaching the student to request assistance. I'm going to take advantage of opportunities like when it's difficult for the student to open the door, okay, to exit the classroom because he's like 4 and the big heavy doors in our school. Perfect opportunity for him to ask for help. Or I might set some opportunities up, during snack time. I'm going to make sure that his snack is in a container that he can't open because I'm really mean. I'm not mean. I'm a really good teacher. Okay, I'm setting up opportunities for him to ask for help, right? And doing teaching in the moment. So that's the data that I'm entering here. Those incidental teaching opportunities. That's the data that I'm entering. For an incidental teaching lesson, you're teaching across context, so I've kind of described some of those contexts for this lesson, okay? Difficulty opening a snack, difficulty opening a door, difficulty zipping, difficulty completing a puzzle, okay? And the way that I can enter data for a incidental teaching lesson, I can enter data each day, or I could wait until the end of the week and enter all the data points together, okay? Because the thing about incidental teaching lessons, the number of opportunities might fluctuate day to day, depending on the number of opportunities you have, okay? Might be the case that all the snacks that Cormac Jr. got today were he could open, whereas tomorrow 3 of his snacks were in containers he could not open, right? Different number of opportunities each day. So what I'm simply going to do here is I'm going to just enter some data for today, or maybe for yesterday, 322. I'm going to say across the course of yesterday, we had 4 opportunities for him to ask for help when he had difficulty opening the snack. He got 4 snacks across the day. One of those were independent. One of those was partial verbal model, and 2 of those were full verbal model. Okay. This is going to total those number of opportunities and work out the percent of those opportunities that was correct and independent, in which case we have 1 out of 4. That's why we're getting 25%. When I hit the save button, those data will be saved below. And the graph that we get for an incidental teaching lesson is not a line graph. It's not a bar graph. It's a stacked bar graph, okay? The dates that we see along our x-axis are week ending dates. Okay, so these are the data that I've entered thus far for this week ending 3/27. Based on the data that I just entered, because I haven't entered any other data this week, 25% of the opportunities were independent, 25% of the opportunities were partial verbal, 50% of the opportunities were full verbal model. Okay, if I enter more data, these colored areas, these percentages will change. Okay, so let's go ahead and do that. I'm going to enter some data that I've collected thus far today. Let's say he was independent in one opportunity and he was incorrect in one opportunity. Hit the save button. You can see the bar changed. Okay, I now have some red on the bar for that incorrect response. I now have a bigger blue area because I had one opportunity that was independent and correct. Okay. If you click on the past data grid, the information that you get, there's the data point that I entered first from yesterday. 100% correct, 25% correct and independent. The most intrusive prompt that we had to use across those 4 opportunities was a full verbal model. The 2 opportunities that I entered for today thus far, 50% correct and independent. Most intrusive prompt was independent. I did not use any prompting. Any questions before we finish? Okay, so we have another session for Thursday. I think what I'll do at the start of Thursday's session is just look quickly at an independent or an incidental teaching lesson from the bank and how we set it up, and a task analysis lesson from the bank and how we set it up, just so that we're familiar with those other lesson types. And then we'll have a good demo on Teach Now. And what I'll do for Thursday session, I'm going to set up preset lessons for some of our practice students, and then based on who is registered for Thursday training, I'll assign each of you a practice student, and we'll all work on the same lessons together with our individual students. So we'll all practice entering data for the same lesson. Okay.
Awesome. Good stuff. Cormac, thank you for going through all this stuff. Looking forward to getting some hands-on stuff going at the next training. And we're also looking forward to getting our attendance sheet back so we can look at our engagement scores.
Definitely. I'll get that to you in the next half hour, and then I'll get the recording of this session out hopefully before 4 today.
Great. We got bragging rights going on between Abby and I, so it'll be a good time.
All right, gang. Enjoy the rest of your Tuesday, and I'll speak to you all Thursday morning.
Great. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.